Welcome to the FASA Leadership Lounge, where we discuss various policies impacting Florida school leaders. I am Michelle White, Executive Director of the Florida Association of School Administrators.
And I'm Jessica Janasiewicz. I serve as a lobbyist for FAFSA and a number of school districts here in Florida. We have most of the 2025 legislative session behind us. Technically, it should finish Friday, May 2nd. So technically, we have 1 week left.
Ooh, well, we'll
Mhm.
see what happens with that. But we did have some things happen this week that we will certainly share. And we want to start with something fun. So, when we are recording this podcast, it is Take Your Child to Work Day. And so much fun to see kiddos with their parents at the Capitol. But we also have some special guests with us. So, Jessica, would you introduce our guests?
I would love to. So, with us today is my daughter Harper and my niece Collins, who came down to the Capitol to see what was happening during this exciting day in the legislative session.
Hi, I'm Harper.
Hi, I'm Collins.
It is so great to have you guys with us and to see what this process is like. We're new to this too. So here we go. It is also really important, of course, to make sure that our students are participating in the legislative process. And I just wanted to give a special shout out to our Florida Association of Student Councils that FAFSA is the state sponsor for. Every year, they bring student council leaders to our advocacy conference to participate and talk with legislators. And despite all of the things that have been going on policy wise, we've had a number of students reaching out to their legislators, and it's really meaningful to see them participate.
It's so fun to see young people get involved in the process and become active citizens like we all wish them to be when they grow up. It's just great. Um, on another note, the House continued their investigation this week into Hope, Florida, and specifically how it handled funds that it received from a settlement between the state and one of the state's Medicaid providers. On Thursday, the committee convened to hear testimony from Amy Rochon from Save Our Society from Drugs and Mark Wilson from the Florida Chamber of Commerce. Those were the organizations that received grants from Hope, Florida, which the House asserts was ultimately passed along to fight the marijuana amendment last fall. Both the individuals indicated that they were not going to be attending the meeting the morning of the meeting. And additionally, a lawyer who worked with Hope, Florida, Jeff Aaron, also declined to appear. Following their Thursday meeting and those developments, Chairman Representative Andrade indicated that the committee's work on the issue is completed at this time. So we will see if anything further comes, but that committee will not be meeting to discuss that anymore this session.
Absolutely. So, another point as well that has happened is that the Senate president announced that there is still no agreement with the House on budget allocations, which means that the budget conferencing could not begin this week as we had hoped. But they, the president indicated his respect for the speaker, said that they would continue to communicate. However, he stated that the Senate would not meet on the floor that Friday. So last Friday, they did not meet, and that members could go home for the weekend, which also means they're not meeting over the weekend like they normally would in the budgeting process. So the earliest that conferencing could begin could be the last week of session as it's scheduled. It's highly likely that this means that session will either have to be extended or a special session will be called.
It is just crazy to think that we're at this point and we don't have any kind of budget allocations yet. So we'll have to stay tuned and see what happens in that final week of session if it ends up being the final week of
Yes.
session. We did have some policy movement this week. In particular, Senate Bill 140, which is the bill that deals with the creation of a job, what they call job engine charters, and the conversion charter process, did pass the full Senate this week and is now in the House in messages. So essentially, that means that it's awaiting the House's movement now. The House bill moved through all of its committees, so they're there to be lined up. So one would assume that one version of the bill, whatever the House decides to pick up, will ultimately pass.
And House Bill 1267 did pass the full House this week unanimously, and not unanimously, excuse me, but it is that train bill that we
Ah,
talked about last week that we're starting to see. So we have a number of policies in there that the Senate likes,
Mm,
like the rural
yes.
education policies. But there's a lot in there that people don't like, and not just educators, but also even realtors, because it includes the significant changes to school grades,
Mm.
which likely will cripple any school that's receiving a school grade if we were to make these shifts at this time.
Absolutely. And similarly, the Senate train bill, Senate Bill 1702, was slated to be heard on the floor in the Senate. This is one of a couple of bills that the Senate has that have a myriad of policies in it. They ultimately temporarily postponed it, which more than likely is saying they're hanging on to it as a bargaining chip, much like a lot of the bills that are still hanging out there. So it will be heard more than likely during that last week of session when I think we can expect to see these train bills flying back and forth between the chambers.
For sure. And we saw a big shock this
Mhm.
week. We have talked about Senate Bill 110, which is a priority of the Senate president, has all of his rural renaissance language in it, endorsed by the US Ag
Yes,
Department, right?
yes, that's right.
And it was completely stripped of all of its language by the House. They added 569 pages of their own language on deregulation of various professions. Huge shock.
Huge.
And we'll see what happens with that because it's not going to make for nice compromising moving forward.
Absolutely. It doesn't really set the stage for an environment where you feel like everyone's happy and working together for sure. Another bill that was passed this week in the House was House Bill 679. That is actually would make an effort to have a resolution on the ballot in 2026 that would say that have term limits for school board members and county commissioners. Of course, we know we already have statutory language for school boards, but this, by put, if it were to be passed by the voters and then ultimately make it into the Constitution, obviously that would make it harder to change in the future. Any kind of bill, statute change can be changed the next year, right? But when you put something in the Constitution, it definitely makes a big difference. So it's awaiting some movement on the Senate. The Senate really has not moved on that language, but we're in compromise time, so anything's possible in the last couple of days.
Absolutely. And House Bill 1607, which more on the positive side of
Mhm.
things, would require all schools to have an AED on the premises and someone trained to use it. It was passed by the full House unanimously. That's the correct bill
Mm.
that was passed and is in messages right now to the Senate. So hopefully they will take that up in this final week and get it moving forward.
Another bill that kind of deals with athletics with students is Senate Bill 248, which the Senate has passed. And that, you may recall, we talked about that, I think, a couple weeks ago. It did a fix on some of the language surrounding private school students and where they can play if they don't have the sport at their particular school. This is really one of those examples of statute needing to catch up with reality. It was, we kind of had a hodgepodge of as things came into play, and we had the introduction of charter schools, and then we had private schools that were playing as part of the FHSA. Now we have homeschool students. They've really had to try to make a statute catch up, and this was an example where really there was just a fix that needed to be done so that everyone could have the same opportunities. That bill passed the Senate. Well, when the House took it up, we just expected they had the same type of language, but in their bill, they did have some additional language surrounding the FHSA board and essentially would take some of the current members of the board who are all appointed by the governor and make three of those individuals appointed by the Senate, three appointed by the House, and then the governor would have two, and then the commissioner would have someone who's either himself or his designee. So, taking some of that control that the governor currently has in appointing everyone and splitting it up amongst the legislative branch, probably something that you can imagine the governor will more than likely not want to sign. Um, and so it was a little surprising since the Senate had passed their bill. The House decided to strip the Senate bill and put that language on the bill. So now it will have to go back to the Senate if it is going to pass, and we'll see what the Senate does there. They have not had any interest in that language thus far. But as we said, we're getting to crunch time, so anything's possible.
Anything can happen for sure. So, on another policy front, but not necessarily through the legislature, is the rule development process. And we talk a lot about this with FASA, of course, and making sure that our members know how that rulemaking process moves forward under the Department of Education with approval by the State Board of Education. Right now, we have 19 rules that are considered under development on a number of issues, everything from transportation to uh, teaching and learning
Mm,
to early learning.
yeah.
So, a number of topics for our members to look at. Last meeting on April 9th, the state board approved 11 rules.
Wow.
Among those have to do with both leadership and teacher preparation programs. So a big highlight for our districts to be paying attention to. And the next state board meeting is scheduled for June 4th at Miami-Dade College.
So it just shows how the work continues. Even when the legislature wraps up, we still have to keep our eyes on those rules because there's a lot of policy that's made there too. Um, Looking at the legislature, and we talked a lot about what has and has not happened this week. To give you an idea of the pace that we're seeing, as of Thursday of week 8, there were only 44 bills that were engrossed and enrolled, and that is really fancy terms for once a bill passes both chambers, both the House and the Senate, it is ordered engrossed and enrolled. They make sure everything is the way it's supposed to be, and once it is in that final stage, it is then sent to the governor by the legislature. So that means we've only had 44 bills that have gone completely through the process as of Thursday of week 8. And keep in mind, some of those are, resolutions for such and such day and things like that. They're not necessarily what we would consider, legislation and big important statutory change. So there's not been a lot happening. And what typically happens is we expect that once allocations come out, it kind of releases the floodgates because negotiation can begin again on policy once they start the budget process. Well, we know now that that's going to clearly be delayed by
Little stalled.
a little stalled. So policy will probably be in that same posture, one would imagine. And we'll see if things change during that last week of session. Perhaps we'll get some movement on the budget, and then maybe that'll move some of that policy. But this is a very small number of bills to have passed at this point in session.
Absolutely. And so it's really going to be important for members to watch our news tracker throughout the week, watch for news that is coming out, any social media posts as language gets moving. That has been our update for this week. We thank you so much for listening, and to our special guests, Harper and Collins. I hope that all of our listeners will help us share the FASA Leadership Lounge, and make sure you go to fasa.net to check out more updates. So stay tuned.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lounge podcast presented by the Florida Association of School Administrators. Today's podcast was hosted by Michelle White and Jessica Janasiewicz. The podcast is produced by Jeff Willoughby. Special thanks to musical director David Higgins. Make sure to subscribe to the Leadership Lounge podcast wherever you find your favorite podcasts. New episodes are released each Monday. For show topic suggestions, questions, or comments, please email communications@fasa.net. We hope you enjoyed the show.